Alright, so the following video is for the engineering and technical support at Apple, or whoever's looking into my case. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, this video won't be so entertaining, but feel free to watch. So I have a 2015 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro, completely maxed out, dedicated graphics, Core i7, 1 terabyte, all that stuff. And what I first noticed was this issue, mainly stemming in Final Cut Pro. So these are three things that I noticed in Final Cut Pro. Number one, I had constant beach balls when I was doing basically nothing. If I go to a transition tab or something, it just spins. I would get longer render and export times. It seemed normally I would get 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 where it takes twice as long to export as the actual timeline length, or just somewhere in that time frame. Now it seems like for a couple minutes of video it takes a half hour or 45 minutes. And then the really frustrating thing was I started not being able to do anything else while Final Cut was exporting. Normally I could let it export and I could search the web or check email, and now everything is just super slow. So the problem I'm noticing is that the CPU clock frequency is throttling even when the package temperature is not that high. Alright, so this is the first example. I'm doing an export in Final Cut Pro, and I've got the iPhone camera. This is the thermlog from PMset, and you can see here the CPU speed limit is steadily dropping. It will drop around the 20s, and looking at Intel Power Gadget, you can see the temperature is not that high. The clock speed is just rapidly dropping. So it turns out it's not just Final Cut Pro. I'm using the Luxmark benchmark utility and doing a GPU stress test, and you can see here that the clock speed is throttling even though the CPU is not under load. In the past I've said this is happening when both the CPU and GPU are under load. Apparently that is not the case. It can be GPU only and the clock speed throttles, and you can see there in Intel Power Gadget the temperature is not that high. Here's an example where I do a CPU only stress test, and you can see it maintains a high temperature under full load. It's not super throttling, it's throttling just enough for thermal management. Now here's another very interesting thing I found. It actually turns out that when I switch, right now I'm on my laptop display and I'm going to plug in my Dell 4K monitor, and you're going to see what happens here. The CPU is actually going to throttle even more. And needless to say, when I plug in an external 4K monitor, that's going to stress the GPU out a lot more than the CPU. So you can take what it's worth from that. For reference, here's a 2011 MacBook Pro, and I'm doing a simultaneous CPU and GPU stress test. And you can see it thermal throttles, but that's only thermal throttling just enough to maintain a safe temperature. It's still in the 90s or high 80s. Now moving on to the responsiveness part, this is more qualitative than quantitative, but here's the 2011 MacBook Pro. I can move the windows around just fine even while it's benchmarking, and when I go to the 2015 system, obviously there's a big frame rate drop. I just want to add on to this by saying I've tried pretty much everything I can think of. This happens in Lightroom as well, and I get to the point where I drag the contrast slider, then I adjust the saturation and vibrancy, and then all of a sudden the contrast changes. So this happens in multiple applications. I think anything that stresses the GPU really good, and I've tried everything from booting off an external drive to new users to an older version of the OS. I've tried every troubleshooting thing I can think of, and so far I seem to get the same results regardless of what I do. I'm not actually sure if this is expected behavior or not, but I highly doubt it because it's radically different than all the other Macs I've tested. And I didn't have these problems when I first got this system. I've only had them over the past couple of months. I used to be able to do other things while Final Cut was rendering, and that just doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So that's my problem and the findings from my tests, and as well as some of the troubleshooting things that I've done. And thanks for anyone looking into this.